Welcome to a video that is intentionally made to make you feel unintelligent. Composition is one of the most important aspects of making art, but instead of telling you how to understand and use it yourself, we'll be laying triangles over famous paintings and making contemplative sighs. Oh, you can really see it here, can't you? Now, this one is just so masterful. Here's an example of the inverted golden ratio, which actively causes the viewer to taste sour things as sweet for 12 minutes. Oh, this one, even if I tried to explain it to you, wouldn't understand, but basically this is good for the reason that I say that it is. Sometimes creating the individual elements of a drawing or scene is complicated enough that this idea of composition, as this nebulous trait that gives an image quality, seems really intimidating. We're going to break things down into ideas that we can actually understand, and then use those to compose better images and tell better visual stories. Composition, whether it's in art or it's musical composition, is all about the arrangement or mixture of elements. The salading, if you will. Little chunks of ham and lettuce and hard-boiled egg, all individually are just foods, but once they're composed together, they become ingredients in a Cobb salad. It's something that you make when you want to eat something healthy, but more substantial than just eating a single piece of broccoli. You want a meal. You listen to an orchestra because you want to hear something sad or dramatic or moving, but not just by a single flute player, but a robust orchestrated sound. Composition now defines the interplay and change in meaning or dynamic between the things that you put into this salad and the way that you do so. The first and most important thing about composition, which might surprise you, has nothing to do with what's inside the image, but the space that it occupies, the shape and size of the container around it. Something that really exemplifies this is the history of the film industry, and quite literally, the film being used itself. As film technology improved, different kinds of films in different aspect ratios were produced, and directors and cinematographers were able to achieve different feelings and effects purely because of the aspect ratio, or how tall versus how wide they are. A frame with a close-up of a character's eyes can seem claustrophobic when the aspect ratio is more square, but when it's given room to breathe on either side, there's a more emotive scene being set with areas of negative space. This is why it's still important to think about composition even when our image is simply a character on a blank background. If you've ever tried to post a character on a blank background to Instagram, maybe you're familiar with messing around with the scale and positioning of it, trying to make it work within the grid that they give you made of thirds. Suddenly you're forced to either reconcile with their fixed square aspect ratio or display it as you would originally made it suboptimally to their feed. Sometimes our aspect ratio or frame is something fixed. For example, these trading cards are always going to be a fixed set of dimensions. Most movies or shows are going to be boarded with the same aspect ratio consistently, unless they want to drop some black bars in to make artificial widescreen, or if there's IMAX cameras being used for some of the shots. Other times, like in comics or individual digital images, our aspect ratio or frame can be a lot more flexible, and we can change it to fit what we need it to. So maybe your aspect ratio is already decided, or you only have a certain amount of room left on something like your comic page, but we can still try to elicit feelings or guide the eye with shapes inside of the image that act as either extensions of the frame or continuations of the feeling, like claustrophobia, or width, or low ceilings. What is the base of our salad? Is it a baby spinach for that smooth, crispy taste, or is it shredded cruciferous vegetables for a really tangy crunch? Now that we're inside the frame, we might have a general idea of what we want to happen, but unfortunately for us, it's not as easy as tossing all the elements of a scene together like you would a salad. We've got to be more deliberate. This is where thumbnailing becomes the most invaluable thing that you can do for planning your image. Thumbnailing is drawing small preliminary versions of your image with simple, bold shapes, representing the elements in the scene. A well-composed image still kind of works even if we're squinting at it. Usually we want our audience to immediately understand or read our image, especially if there's a clear story or action that we want them to see. Going back to our recent critique video about staging, we need to think about the fourth wall that we're peering through. Characters talking to each other and overlapping each other because we're looking at them over one of the character's shoulders, that really won't read as well as viewing them side by side. Now, of course, there's value in executing a composition that is viewed over one of the character's shoulders, but the result will be something that feels like we're in the shoes of only one character in reaction to the other, and we won't be able to see our shoulder character's face or expression as well. Even if we're doing this, it just makes more sense to separate them out as two elements, instead of covering the face of one character with the back of the other character's head. It's here in our thumbnailing phase that it's also really important to think about value. Good composition and illustration lives and dies by the values being used. Value defines how light or dark an element is, and values that are close together become difficult to tell apart when they're next to each other, while values that are far apart show a lot of clear contrast. Using some value in the composition process also has the added bonus of turning what might just be line work into shapes. Something that might look good as a pencil sketch, or something that you lie to yourself about fixing later, will immediately become a shape with value. It might mean pulling some of these pieces apart or rearranging them so that we understand better or we understand your intent more clearly. Now, what about the golden ratio and the myriad of triangles that are being laid over the image? What about the pringling? Is there a formula you should be following? Should you be laying that triangle over your image just to make sure that it's correct? Well, some yes, but mostly no. Obviously, the golden ratio is pleasing, and the arrangement of elements inside or around it makes them somewhat dynamic and purposeful. But more often than not, these shapes and tricks are simply finding a pattern in something to confirm a bias that really, in truth, is more about guiding the eye in a way that makes sense or is visually clear or pleasing. So what might be more helpful for you is to make your own connections within your composition to see what kinds of relationships are being made between elements and how the eye might be guided through your image. What does someone see first, and where does that lead them? Is there a smoother way to guide someone so that they see everything that's important first? Is there something else that's fighting the main focus of your image because it has, let's say, too much contrast in value? Sometimes all that needs to happen is to employ some stagecraft. Create a gradient of value that spotlights an element. Hide something creepily in the shadows by only showing so much of it or making it blend in with the background. Repeat an element, like slats in a fence, only so that the pattern can be broken by something that you want people to notice. Color and hue become a valuable extension of value, of course. Contrast and hue can be about as powerful as contrast in value, and again, it can make or break an illustration. I think a lot of people tie perspective up with composition too, and that's definitely valid to a degree. Perspective can be as potent a tool for evoking a mood or feeling as well. I would just say that sometimes we have a tendency to try and execute something with really difficult perspective just to say that we did, instead of trying to find the clearest way to express the idea. Next, if you've tried to find certain through lines and patterns in your image, the invisible guiding lines that unify the image, this might be a good opportunity to support those shapes or frame them with some secondary elements. This might be the shape of something in the foreground that's cutting a visual chunk out of our corner. It might be lines in the background or secondary movement of things like cloth, hair, or rope that reinforce or follow some unity in the image. Really, if I had one big piece of admonition for newer artists, it's to pull those elements in your scene apart so that they have some room to breathe. Be careful and deliberate about important visual pieces overlapping each other. Think about the negative space that you're making as much as the elements themselves. Use some amount of soft atmosphere to separate things out that might be mixing together too much. I wish you all the best with your visual salads. I hope they're hung in a museum so that a critic in the year 2180 can talk about how masterfully you constructed the nape of a neck out of octagons. Composition feels like it's its own daunting branch of art, the way that algebra or calculus are to math, but keep in mind that it's about the execution and the relationships being made between the elements that you make. What are you trying to communicate with them, and is there a way that you can communicate them even better? If you'd like for us to talk more about composition in the future, let me know, and if the video was helpful for you, please let me know in the comments. I know that writing something insightful in a YouTube comment seems too difficult to be worth doing, but honestly, comments help the videos, and they let me know that what I'm saying is resonating. You don't have to be insightful. My course Learn Character Design is available at learncharacterdesign.com. It's over 18 hours of comprehensive character design and drawing curriculum. You can get this month's Biko's backpack in your mailbox over at patreon.com/bageldenizen, and you can follow me on Instagram, Twitter, and Twitch at bageldenizen. Thank you so much for watching, and have fun creating.